tonight is a big night on Awaken the Dream Radio.
Well, I'm so excited to introduce our next guest. I had the pleasure, Dr. Dream and I actually had the pleasure of meeting Neil Kramer at a SETI ranch at the conference over the summer, and our children did as well. And I will never forget my son running out of his presentation saying, "Neil Kramer rocks." So I know we're in for something awesome. Neil Kramer is a British philosopher and teacher specializing in the fields of consciousness, metaphysics, and mysticism. Kramer has made a lifelong independent study of philosophy, mystical traditions, religion, and esoteric world history. He shares his path of transformation and empowerment in writings, recordings, interviews, and lectures, as well as giving personal consultation and group workshops. He is a frequent guest on leading alternative radio and internet shows, enjoying international audiences and enthusiastic support. His work regularly appears on cutting-edge media portals and is featured on television networks in the U.S., UK, Canada, and Europe. He's spoken at international conferences and events all over the place. I'm sure, people have seen him and heard him at places such as the Beyond Knowledge Conference in 2009, the Alternative Research Community Convention in 2010, and a bunch of others, including the Expos and also the 2012 Global Transformation Conference. Kramer speaks on many fascinating subjects and is renowned for his unique blend of lucidity, empowerment, and authenticity. He divides his time between Oregon, Washington, and New York. Thank you so much for joining us, Neil. How are you today?
It's a pleasure to be with you again. I am very, very well. How are you guys doing?
Excellent.
Doing great.
Good.
Have to say that not only did Gavin come running out of your presentation at SETI Ranch saying Neil Kramer rocks, but we've been hearing it this week building up to this broadcast. So we've got quite the Southern California fan club here for you.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Thank you.
So, Neil, before we dive into everything, and of course the title of our broadcast tonight is 2013, The State of Consciousness, Metaphysics, and Mysticism. Before we get into the heart of matters and everything, tell us a little bit about the foundation of who you are and how your past kind of really set things up for you to do this. I know that you've really sort of spearheaded your evolution really very much like on your own, like very self-taught.
Yeah, that's right. I'll keep this brief because I think we can go on and on about our stories, and I know that for newcomers that's always interesting. But the principle of it is that from a young age I kind of just inherently was suspicious about the worldview that was being sort of, inculcated into all the heads of all the children around me. So from parents, from schools, from, soccer practice, from the malls, from the music, the television, the magazines, everything. I just thought something's just off. Something is just, there's a lack of harmony here. There's a lack of depth here. There's a lack of meaning here. And I was just kind of staggered, really, that no one else was saying the same thing. I just couldn't believe that I was alone, feeling that there was something wrong, out there, as it were. So, being the studious young man that I was actually quite interested in sports and stuff as a young man, which is unusual in this business, I suppose, because we usually like geeks and loners and all this kind of stuff. But I went to the library and sought out books by people who felt the same way I did. And initially that was philosophers, all dead German philosophers. And they all felt similar things. And the way they wrote, I thought, oh yeah, this guy has felt like this. And this guy has seen this as well. And it was very comforting to find that there were many other people, of course, who had felt the way this young, 15-year-old kid did, me. And then as time progressed, to cut a long story short, that moved into spiritual literature. So all the usual things, East and West, North and South, modern and ancient, particularly Eastern, of course, initially as a nice contrast to our Western Christian roots. And then the third phase of it was really then what I would term mysticism, which was people who took the discipline of philosophy and took some of the aspirational and faith-related resonances of religion, but actually applied it into their own life and their own transformation. And those guys and girls were mystics, and they were very prominent in the sort of medieval period onwards to right up to today. But going further back as well into, pre-Christian times and Gnostic times and whatnot. And I discovered that there was this body of men largely, although women came into it much more in the 18th and 19th century, but there was this body of men who were as committed to uncovering some of the mysteries of what's going on here as anyone had ever come across, more so than the philosophers, more so than the ascetics and the priests and the, religious devotees, much more so than that, because they treated it personally, not as an academic thing, not as a scholarly thing, not as research, but as a personal, committed endeavour, and that's what appealed to me. And so, in my own way, in my work, I have taken that mystical impulse, which is to essentially treat your own life as the instrument for transformation and growth and enlightenment. Your own life, not a book, not some mystical thing outside of yourself, but your very own circumstances, your wife and children, your money, your bank account, the knives in the kitchen, the spray under the sink, all the very mundane little stupid things, and the big things, the big galactic things, the universal things, the higher dimensional things, the ultra-terrestrials, the archons and the demons and the angels, everything, the whole universe, from the very most prosaic little things in our lives that we tend to think are very unmagical, to the very paranormal, supernatural, breakthrough experiences. And that's what the mystic does. They don't draw a distinction between the two. So that is the arc of my of my learning, and it is a very self-directed one. You're right in that.
Wow. It's just so amazing to hear somebody really talk about this, because it's so important to just bring it down to just ourselves, our life, our family, our relationships, and everything under the sun to reach the larger perspective and to, affect it. So just loving what you're saying. And we're just, it's so critical to understand this right now, with everything that's, going down. I know things have always been going down, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the power of the sovereign spirit. I know you wrote an essay about it, and I'd love to just delve into it, because I think it's just so important that people really pay attention to this part of themselves, which is powerful.
Sure. Well, sovereignty is essentially self-authority. It is recognizing yourself as the singular, unique, divine authority in the universe. It's you. And only you can arbitrate on what is real and unreal, what is true and untrue, and what is pure and impure, right? And essentially that's all it is. That's what sovereignty is. How it emanates out, there are many different ways of expressing that. So I have friends who express it in legal study. I have friends who express it in Qigong and energetic martial arts study. I have friends who express it purely intellectually, friends who express it emotionally, whatever. So it is something that goes throughout the system. It filters, as you might say, in Hindu style, throughout all the chakras. It's something that is applicable from the root right through to the crown. And that sovereignty is something that's accessible to everybody, because initially it's simply like nobody can tell you what to do. Nobody has any right or any authority over you, and it is prudent and wise and instructive to envision yourself as this divine agent right from source who parachutes onto the planet, and you can do whatever you want. You can be whoever you want. You can do whatever you want. You don't need any licenses, no permits, no currency, you don't need to sign anything, there's no contracts, there's no agreements, there is nothing. All there is what you consent to. So the trick of the control system, if we just put our conspiracy filter on for a minute, is to trick us into agreeing to things that we don't really understand, like citizenship, for example, or like driving licenses, or to go to war, or to contract somebody for 2 years to provide us with a little black rectangle in our pocket that we can use to communicate with our friends and family with. So however you choose to do this, there are agreements thrust before you all the time. And as I say, the delusion is, the deception is, we don't know what an agreement is, and we don't know when we're agreeing to one. So, for example, if you go to court and I don't know what they call them in England, they call them the usher says, all rise, and then everybody stands up and the judge walks in and everybody sits down. When you rise, you are agreeing to the authority of that court. That is a hidden agreement, an example of a hidden agreement that we're not told is an agreement, but once you agree to it, you are then bound to the authority, to the jurisdiction of that entity. And those things are throughout our society, and I could list 100 of them. Suffice to say that sovereignty, the power of the sovereign spirit, is to withdraw all consent initially back into yourself, to say, well, I'm going to choose what I consent to. So if Laura Eisenhower and Dr. Dream say, hey, do you want to come and have a coffee with us? I might go, yes, I do. I understand that agreement. I understand the ramifications of it, and I accept it. Yes, I do. But if somebody is hoodwinking me into agreements, not only does it create problems in the world, which we know all about, but it also takes away your ability to channel consciousness. Because with every agreement, consciousness is required to maintain that agreement, subconsciously, you might say. So in the same way that if we harbour a hatred or a loathing or a resentment for a thing or a person, that requires maintenance. That thing, that loathing, that resentment, it requires maintenance. So the more that we harbour these negative agreements, the less consciousness, the less light we have for our endeavours. So sovereignty is about taking back what you didn't even know you were putting out.
Really cool.
I love this. So let's get into the trenches then with this. How about advice on how to get to the core of who we really are as individuals? But and while that may sound somewhat okay to do, we've got all of our conditioning, the programming, and all these hidden agreements. What, just from the listener that's hearing this and saying, wow, okay, how would you describe the process to do that, to really understand our true nature, not like how it's been sort of thrust upon us?
Well, the real answer to that question is you have to live 1,000 years on Earth to understand who you are and what you're doing. That is the real answer. I know it's kind of like funny and we can use that as a metaphor and speak figuratively, but I would say, based on my understanding, that is generally speaking about the right duration. And for most people, for most Homo sapiens, that's probably about right, which is to understand what you are, you need to refine your ability to channel consciousness to a very high level. So you need an attainment of purity, that is to get the vessel of your brain, and your mind to a certain level where you can begin to ask that question, let alone answer it. So rather like Icarus, is it, who flies to the sun and says, right, tell me, what is it? Tell me the big thing. Tell me the big transcendental thing. And he says, well, come closer. And if you're not ready, it will melt you. It It will boggle your mind. It will melt your being. It will disassociate yourself. So the first part of that process, to properly answer your question, is to, in my view, is what I would call a stage of observation, which is to observe what you are now. Not what you think you are or what you'd like to be, but what are you now? What are you doing in your life? That's a 10-year process. The second stage is classically what we would call reformation, which is based on your observations, then to go about changing what you don't think is in alignment with your growth and what you don't think is sincere. The things that are inauthentic in your life, cut them out, make them go away. Now, if you've entered into agreements, particularly if you've brought children or indebtedness or energetic agreements, or you've created responsibilities and commitments, we're not talking about walking away from those. We're talking about seeing them in the proper manner, framing those things for what they are. So that's a long process, that reformation as well. It's a good one, though. Then you come to the question of what I call selfhood, which is only when you've had a lengthy period of observation and reformation can you then begin to look at what you are. So that process of selfhood begins to ask those questions then, to say, well, there is a human flesh and bone element to me. There is. I am an animal on this planet. I am of the animal, the mineral, and the vegetable. I grow out of this planet no different to a tree or a rock or an ocean. I am of this planet, okay? That is one element of me. So this is the question of selfhood. Another element of me, there appears to be a higher aspirational component of my identity that sits above the material vulgarities of the planet and beauties, but also the ugliness and the pain and the sorrow. Something that sits outside that tremendous polarization of destruction and creation, that is untouched by that, in a completely harmonic realm, what we might call a higher dimensional realm. That is part of me. I feel it. And through my observational instruction, I have begun to formulate a better relationship with that thing. In Christian esoteric mysticism, they call this communion with the higher guardian angel. And it's a way of fostering a relationship between, as we might simply say, your lower self and your higher self, to say, let's make friends, let's swap information, let's channel, let's see, let's know, let's experience, let's project, let's know the astral and the physical, all those wonderful things. And as you get into this deeper question of selfhood, sooner or later, you realize that there's yet another element to this stuff, which is divine, which is transpersonal, which is beyond the individual, beyond consonances with other individuals, beyond alliances with other individuals, something very transcendent. And that is simply stated God, to use that word. And that is part of our identity as well. So those three things can begin to be explored at that point. And an old aphorism of mine, or an axiom rather, is that to transcend self, which is essential for growth, you must first attain total selfhood. So you must become yourself fully in every expression, socially, mentally, sexually, intellectually, physically, everything. You must become yourself fully and express all of it before you can begin to transcend it. And then you start to get to the nub of who we are. So that's a long process, and if you try really hard, you could do it in 100 years. But if you take your time and enjoy it, enjoy the journey, it's usually about 1,000 years, over obviously several incarnations. And I would say, generally speaking, that is probably about right.
Wow. Very cool. This sort of feels like it leads into just like the alchemy of will. Can you talk to us about that? I know you did a workshop, and I love...
I am doing one on that in September, yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. Well, that component of the system that is so magical is will, is divine will. And when we think of will in normal terms, we think it's like, oh yes, I am this, I am that, I'm going here, I am doing that, I'm not doing that, and it's like you're like imposing your will on something, or you're being forthright in self and self's impression on the world. Will is something that encompasses that, yes, but as I say, it's also something that has a sort of divine origin. So will brings about questions of determinism and fatalism and free will and no free will and all these complex things. And it essentially gives you, once you investigate it, which we're going to do in 3 weeks up in Trout Lake again for the weekend, and a bunch of people are going to come to this place, and we're going to investigate this subject for the weekend, specifically focus on this study. What it begins to show you is that you have free will as the animal self, and you have many choices as the higher self, and as divine will, you don't need free will, because it is all will. It is the will of everything. It is the will of every tree that grows, every star that emanates, every moon that reflects, every ocean that rises and falls. That is the will. That is divine will. It's completely orchestral in its movement. Everything is together. So there's no need for an individual, a separation out of that. So the alchemy of will is to understand those things exist multidimensionally together at the same time. So when for example, you have that intuition, this is just something I've got to do. This is something for me, this is my path, this is my trajectory, and you feel it in your bones, that's divine will. That's a higher will that is coming beyond you. It is a divine ordinance. Your own personal will is the thing that allows that to be or not to be. So if you are very academic and very intellectual and very left-brained, then you're going to not be able to hear that. You're not going to be able to pick up on that faint radio signal, because it is a very subtle emanation. So part of the alchemy of will is to train the mind to be able to balance logic and reason and discipline with openness and transparency and surrender, and to know when those things are correctly applied, when to be very forthright and solid, and when to be very yielding and flexible. So alchemy, as with laboratory alchemy, is in understanding the essential components that make up the world, the minerals of life itself of this planet, and the chemical relationships between them. They are direct analogues, direct representational analogues to what goes on inside us in our minds and hearts. And the magic of it, the transformational element where you actually get to change stuff, to change one thing into another, that's the alchemical part. That's the part where you start to be able to sculpt reality, to change a path. Instead of going this way, you can go that way once you have learned how to discipline the mind in this manner. So that's the sort of rough framework of it, and obviously we have many precedents of it throughout history, but this is my view of it. This is the way I see it. So yeah, it's a very, very fascinating thing, and something that I love to share. So it'll be very impassioned and creative and funny and rewarding, one would hope.
Oh, that's going to be awesome. Wow.
That sounds really wonderful. Share with us, if you will, Neil, connect the dots, I guess, about your enduring passion for mysticism and philosophy, and how that then has translated into this workshop and this offering, and what you're doing for all of us now.
That's a great question. I could go so many different ways with that. I would say that you guys know what it is to work in the alternative, spiritual, metaphysical community, right? And if we put our hands on our hearts and look up to our higher good, our own inner higher truth, we can say that there's a lot of flaky nonsense in this field. And I would say, I don't know about you guys, that anyone who's trying to make themselves better deserves a pat on the back. And anyone who is showing up deserves a pat on the back. Well done. Well done for trying, okay? So anyone who ever goes to a conference or buys a book or speaks with a neighbour about something substantial gets my support, period, right? Whoever it is, whatever they're doing. But if you're teaching, if you dare to step into the role of the teacher, you take on an additional responsibility, which is to have discipline. To have the discipline of knowing what's appropriate and what's not. As I don't need to tell you as a mother, Laura, but to know the discipline of accommodating an independent person who comes and says, I want to do this, and you go, no, I don't think that's a good idea. Or they say, well, what's this? And you say, well, I don't think we need to talk about that right now, but let me tell you the principle of it. Let me answer that respectfully, but I don't want to talk to you about all the details about that right now. So you have a situation that's unique in this field of operation where people look up to people as ourselves and say, look, you guys have spent a lot of time looking at this stuff, and maybe you also have a gift for certain things. So tell me something. Tell me what I need to do to get okay in myself. Tell me what I need to do to be all right inside and to live a more fulfilling life. How do I do that? And of the 100 people that I meet, let's say, annually, and it's probably a lot more, but people who write books and stand up on the microphone, of those 100, I would say half a dozen of them are really genuinely doing it every day in their own life. And the other, 94 or whatever, are not. They're great people, they're writing some good stuff, they're making some nice little movies and whatnot, but they're not really doing it. Not really. They're sort of courting it. They are courting the idea of being a spiritual person. Because once you start to get close to it, you realize that the double-edged blade of the spiritual practitioner is that, yes, you gain wisdom and satisfaction at a very deep level that eludes the commonplace mind that we once were, that we chose not to be anymore. However, it also changes your life. It turns everything upside down. And all the things that used to be acceptable are no longer acceptable. Sitting in that place, you can't sit there anymore. Going here, you need to stay there a little bit longer now. Those people, you can't tolerate them anymore because they do your fruit in, as we say in Manchester. They make you go crazy. Other people are so delicious that you want to spend more time with them and talk to them more and be more intimate in your exchanges of spirit and philosophy and psychology. So it changes how you live, how you do things. So my insistence on the seriousness of this journey kind of highlights the European tendency to have stages of initiation, which a lot of people think, it's some sort of spooky David Icke thing where there's all like masons and sorcerers and dark conjurations. Well, yeah, that definitely goes on. But initiation, stages of initiation into different layers of knowledge and experience were there to protect people from burning themselves, as it were. To get too close to the flame too fast, you'll just melt. So initiation is just like a little white picket fence that you just shut the gate in front of your shins, and you say, well, just stop there a second. Just stop there a second. Look at your life. Look at what you've got. Look at what you're capable of doing now, and just pause for a moment before you open that little gate and walk to the next layer. So that's what initiation is for. And the key one, which is so important in our lives these days, is simplicity, right? So in the ancient times, in Britain and France and Germany, as the heartland of European mysticism, if your life was complicated, you were in no position for spiritual transformation and for transcendental knowledge. You are in no position to receive it because, as we said before, your light distribution is too fragmented. So the mystic has to learn how to foster that flame. So it's like a volcano. It's like a nuclear reactor. If you don't get to do that, if you don't get to focus that light inside, it's just like a little candle flame, which is very pure and beautiful, yes, and we all have that, even the very most, basic people out there who don't think of these things. We all have it, but if it is that very faint candle flame, the merest little whisper of wind that comes along, a little gust of wind, will blow it out. And you can't really do anything with that. So the mystic says, right, well, what are the things that make that candle flame weak? And our word for that today is complexity. So the more complex your life is, the weaker your ability to focus your divine light, which is why our forefathers in this realm, all our spiritual ancestors, all our most excellent lineage in this respect, wander about in these little brown robes with nothing. It's not because they're making some show of piousness or some show of ascetic adherence. They're doing it because the simplicity that affords them gives them greater potential for channeling power, consciousness, light. So you'll never find somebody who is able to levitate or do telekinesis or have telepathy who has a complex life. It never happens. It's always the other way around. So the more simplicity you can draw into your own existence, the better. It just has a tremendous effect. We are meant to live in a very smooth, easy, flowing life. And to have loads and loads and loads of things going on is a disaster for the mystic. So that's very contrary to what is seen as a successful modern life, because our culture tells us that the more you've got going on and the more crazy things you've got going on, the more successful and happy you are. And that's just simply not true.
I like that lesson.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, wow, with so many traps and deceptions out there, including, New Age deceptions, how can one really find their integrity and true spiritual embodiment and know what the right choices are? Like, what signs can they look out for to know that they're on the right track with all this sort of interference, happening outside?
It's a great question, that. It's really, really important that. You and I have a slight advantage in that we can usually shake the hand of the person, look into their eyes, can't we, because we meet people. And when you stood in front of somebody for 2 minutes, you get a sense pretty fast and think, yeah, you're okay. Oh, no, you're a wanker, That's a shame. I thought you were good. I've seen you, I'm not going to obviously name any names, but sometimes, I see somebody, I think, oh, that book's excellent, and I see a little YouTube video, and then I think, oh, yeah, I'm going to this conference, and that dude's going to be there. And I meet him and just think, oh, my God. It's like they lack authenticity. They lack the sincerity of what they're doing. So they're aware of their past, but they're not really walking it. So you get an advantage when you meet somebody, but I think you can develop that skill on a personal level with people, just as you can to have a woman's intuition for a thing or a man's instinct for a thing, to think yes or no, what is going on here? Why is it sometimes a yes? Why is it sometimes a no? My answer to that is to say that usually when somebody is very sincere in their work, particularly if it has a spiritual or metaphysical component, it's a giving energy. It's a very giving energy. And when you go away from their work, you feel as if you've gained something, you've been given something, and you've been juiced up, right? Charged. If it's insincere or confused, it doesn't mean the person is bad, but the work is insincerely applied, then their energy is very depleting. And when you go away from one of their things, you walk away feeling less. And you think, well, I just feel less now. Do you know what I mean? I just feel kind of confused or scared or disempowered or something like that. I just feel less. So I think it is a sign of maturity to say that, well, someone who's really doing this is never going to allow that to happen. You're never going to walk out of that room or away from that book or that web page or whatever it is feeling less, because all spiritual engagement is inherently empowering. And so if it tips into imbalance and you're in Alex Jones territory, bless him, does some good work, but if you're solely looking at what people are doing to you, which is abusive and exploitative and destructive, then guess what? That's what you're going to reflect back, because you're not exercising your own sovereignty. You concede to this victim mentality. And so you enable that abusive dysfunction in the same way that the hostage enables the kidnapper or whatever. And it just becomes an enabling, dysfunctional, codependent relationship. And that is absolutely rife on the conspiracy forums, if you look at those things. There's like a lot of people there who think they're having a bit of a laugh in the 20s and 30s. When they're in the 50s and 60s, that stuff is going to come back to them. And it's going to come back with a payload, because it's imbalanced. So I think the discernment required is to say, well, where is their balance? Where is their balance? Where do I feel balance of light and dark, of destruction? Very important, real thing in life. Without destruction, there is no life. Where is there a balance of creation? Very important in life. Without creation, there is no life. So who do I feel that balance in? Where is that felt? In the ancient texts, in the modern ones, not just people wandering around California and New York like us, but people who've been doing this for thousands of years. They're not all good. Just because a book is old and it was written in China 3,000 years ago doesn't mean anything. You've still got to feel the truth of it and the balance of it. And I still come across stuff. Now I found this little Irish mystical book from 300 years ago, very recent. And this guy was just incredible. Absolutely incredible. I thought, oh my God, no one's ever heard of him. He's incredible. And then I'll go back to the Upanishads and think, well, there's some really excellent stuff in here, but boy, oh boy, this is a tricky one, because it's heavily tipped in one direction, this. And that's a tough thing for the Western mind, because Hindu philosophy is so ingrained into culture, Hindu culture, you can't separate it out as a religion. It's not a religion. It's not a spiritual system. Hindu philosophy is an outlook, is a life outlook. So the Upanishads and a lot of those kind of texts, they don't really reflect well in the West without a lot of interpretation and understanding Hindu culture. We do have these wonderful people, sadly now he's dead, Alan Watts, the British philosopher, who can give us a much better understanding of that by educating us about Hindu culture and about Indian ancient philosophy, and saying, right, when you get this, then you can appreciate it, then you can do it. It's like understanding a little bit about an artist before you go and walk into the gallery and say, right, now I know a bit about what he's trying to say, Rothko. These bloody big, bars of colour aren't quite so silly anymore. I get what he's saying now. I understand what he's trying to do. He's trying to transcend form. So that's why there's no form. That's why there's not a picture of a table or a little girl or an apple or a cloud. There's no form, because he's trying to transcend it. And he's trying to transcend it through the emotions. So you're supposed to walk up close to it and lose yourself in the colour of that Rothko painting. So it can be beneficial to understand beforehand what it is you're getting into, just as I say with an artist. No different with Buddhism and Hinduism and, Rosicrucianism and Theosophy. It's good to know how it came about and who was doing it and why it came about and where its roots are. So that's very little understood. People will buy a Buddhism book and say, hey, this is cool. I'm a Buddhist, and I've been to a Vipassana retreat and everything, and so I'm a Buddhist now, and I do this thing for 20 minutes. Well, great, that's really, really cool, but understand the roots of it, and what was there before that, and why did that come in? And so a lot of my teaching work, independently and publicly and privately and collectively, is dealing with the roots of things. Where did they come from? Because many of those roots, in my understanding, are not publicly shared, because it kind of undermines people's confidence in things. So understanding the root of a thing gives you the wisdom of its flower, of its blossom. So we have to always go back to that root.
Yes.
Beautiful. So, Neil, speak to us about the 2012 portal. I mean, and here we are, into the second half of 2013. I know we all, we're not focused on, or a lot of us were not focused on having expectations, but did you have expectations for 2012? And just talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. There's a guy called Paul Levy, who is a spiritual dude who has written a book called Dispelling Wetiko, and he lives in Portland, and he and I got together and talked about this earlier this year. It's a really good question, because undoubtedly, particularly on the West Coast, an awful lot of people had high expectations of a breakthrough experience last winter. There's no question about that. Mm-hmm. And if you go back through your records and look at who said what, a lot of quite good people said some very silly things. And it's like, oh my gosh, do you remember that he said that, she said that? And you go back through it and say, they've gone very quiet about that. Everybody seems to have forgotten about that. It's rather like a prophet who gets 10 things wrong and then one thing right, and the only thing that's remembered is the one thing that they got right. So that definitely happened. My view of it is that any experience that devalues personal growth is not natural, is not organic. So if there was something that came along that suddenly elevated us all and transformed us all, why bother having a path of growth up to that point? For people who are new to it, or people who've been going through all kinds of stuff, it would dismantle all the stuff that you've previously achieved by saying, well, who cares? Look, we're going to transcend in a few weeks, so don't bother. Just sit on the sofa and watch reruns of the X-Files or something. Do whatever you want. I don't care, because you're going to transcend. It doesn't work like that. The universe doesn't waste a single particle of energy ever, anywhere. So all our endeavors and our growth in our lives have to fruit individually, which is why we don't have mass collective transcendent events. They don't happen because they are not organic. They're not part of nature. When they do come about, they are directed from elsewhere. They are synthetic events. So when the mothership comes and says, hey everyone, the Earth's going to go wrong, and there's going to be some upsetting, unpleasant scenes and floods and volcanoes and earthquakes and everything's going to disappear. You guys who are super, you come with us and we'll save you. If that ever happened, I'd just be extremely dubious about anything of that nature, because it detaches the individual from their own divine connection, completely detaches them and reasserts an abusive relationship, in my view, at a very fundamental level. There's a lot of steps to make that statement, but I've made them. I think that all events that bring transcendence are always singular and always personal. And when you do have a really beautiful connection with a group of people, if you're doing a group meditation, or if you've known somebody very intimately for many decades, you can share experiences and have collective experiences. And if you can ping your consciousness out of the 3D into the 4D, it's much easier to have shared experiences there, much easier, and to have shared dreams, for example. I had an experience of it last week with 2 students, if I may say that, of mine, who shared a very, very specific, very detailed dream, and it's absolutely bang on. And that is because their minds weren't operating as just, picture houses within the 3D brain. They weren't there at all. They were somewhere else. So the 2012 phenomena is really about authority. Absolutely, it's about authority. To say, are you on your own journey, or really do you want to be allied with someone else's journey? Do you want to follow someone else's journey and just piggyback onto that one? And all the piggybackers had a tremendous disappointment. Tremendous disappointment. All those who had started their own journey, whether that was last week or 1,000 years ago, it's cool. There were some wonderful things that happened. There were some energetic flares. There were some massive deconstructions that went on in September through to January. So lots of things dissolved. I've never seen more marriages break down in that period in my whole life. People's personal circumstances were thrown into turmoil, which is the very, very essence of alchemy, is this state of, interesting word, disequilibration, which is where you take two systems and you throw them into such disarray that temporarily they're neither one thing nor another. It's just all up in the air, all bets are off. That happened a lot in 2012, but it was very human. It was a very earth-based transformation. It was like saying, all the things that are insincere, let me just show them to you all at once. And it was like, oh my gosh, it was so horrendous and hideous for a lot of people. It was incredible. So I think that momentous things definitely happened, but they were very human and they were very, very earth-rooted.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's so well put, and I just really, I feel that big time. So how do you think people can really work with their lower nature, and just the fact that, people are wired to want instant gratification and to appease their ego, and it seems, this whole world is about, addicting people to the matrix. How do you think we should deal with this on a collective level so that, spiritual awakening can really happen? Because, the word freedom is so difficult to understand because one would lead one into a trap, but, true freedom seems like a whole different thing. How would you address all that?
I would say that how do you deal with our lower animal instincts, and how does that relate to freedom? First of all, we have to have a sort of very, very brutal honesty about what we are, which is animals, right? So that is a very distinct component of what we are. We are other things as well. So we are this beautiful, pristine, inviolable, pure self that is never tainted by the grime and the bizarreness of Earth. Never. It is never touched by it. It's always pure and innocent like a child. That aspect of it is also there. And again, as I say, we also have this divinity within us, which is so transcendent. We can't even begin to fathom it right now, but it's there and we always have it. So a very key stage in understanding this process of unfoldment and alchemical will is multidimensionality, is to say, well, you have to accept that those three things exist at the same time. The animal, the soul, the divine, they are you. That is what you are, those three things all squished up together. But they exist in parallel, like parallel timelines. They're going on at the same time, like three radio stations. They're all squished up together, but you can only sort of tune into one at a time when you're in the 3D, when you're being the animal. You can only tune into one at a time. And the one that's easiest to tune into is the one where you have work to do. So if you are a 3D being, an animal of flesh and blood, and most of your consciousness, most of the time, is here, that indicates this is where your work is at the moment, right? You may be aware of your higher nature, and you may be training yourself to bring that online more. Brilliant. That's really important. You may also be aware of your divine ordinance and your divine lineage, which is a tremendous comfort and an enormous piece of truth that helps to make sense of a lot of things on Earth. That's also very good. But ignore your animal nature at your peril, because the whole point of Earth is to be thrust into a polarized world of creation and destruction around every corner, where one minute you feel fantastic and the next minute you feel like you know what. That is the whole point of this. And the emotional responses that brings about are very, very important. They are something for us to investigate. What are emotions? What is the nature of an emotion? What actually is it? That's a very important study, a very important investigation. A key piece of development in the people I work with. Most of my teaching work is one-to-one, is with individuals who engage me as a sort of consulting mystic, if you like. And we work together over time, some people for many years. And one of the things that is a key tool in this is to discharge energy, right? So rather like an angry person who simmers and seethes, right, over a long time, and then one day you just say, oh, you've just left your teacup out there, and they go, I know, I left my teacup out there, and they just blow up, and they just go crazy. It's not about the teacup, is it? It's about 3 months of held-in energy. Just energy, that's all it is, and we'll call it whatever we want, but it's a kind of energy. So discharging energy on a regular basis is really important, and part of the honesty required in that is one of the key energies of a human being is destruction. So how do you discharge and express destructive energy in a safe, excellent way, right? Now, there are so many expressions of that, we haven't got time to go into it, but one particular expression that I have worked with in the past, which is very beautiful, is shotgun painting, right? Where you take shotgun cartridges filled with paint and with a shotgun and you blast them onto walls. So it's kind of like Jackson Pollock with guns, right? That, for the person who is a pacifist, who doesn't want to touch guns, who thinks this is bad, whatever, has a tremendously cathartic effect to say, well, let's redefine what that is. Instead of putting lead in it, which blows someone's head off, let's put art inside it, right? Let's redefine, let's reframe what that is, but also give you the expression of aggression. Like a painter like Van Gogh would be full of passion and anger and resentment and bitterness and sadness, but he'd throw it into his painting and it would be transformed at that point. And over time, it's transformed what he's actually doing. Just like all the best artists are tormented, aren't they? You know, a happy artist is rubbish usually. Tormented artists produce this enormously sexy, romantic, beautiful, beautiful music and literature and painting. Why? Because they're expressing one of the mysteries of Earth. One of the mysteries of Earth. So just like those people, we have to create outlets in our life where we can express the negative as well as the positive. We know what the positives are. Go and do yoga, play the guitar, sing and dance, cook beautiful food, be with your friends, laugh a lot. You know, we know how to do those things. Humans are good at that stuff. Sometimes we need a bit of help and a bit of a reminder, but generally we do that well. But how do you express the negative? How do you do that? Well, you make it artistic. You make it theatrical. You take it and you parody it. So if you have a dark impulse, you might go to a strange nightclub, a strange fetish nightclub, and dance around and pretend you're the devil and smoke cigarettes and drink whiskey and go crazy and get it out your system. Get it out your system. You know, go there, parody it, parody that thing by, you know, making it theatrical, by embodying it. Like pagans used to do this a lot. The monsters that would scare them, the demons that would scare them, they would dress up as it to sort of disempower it, to diffuse the energy of it. So to understand the devil, you had to become it. And to disempower the devil, you had to be the devil. But you do it on your own terms. So there's no one's getting hurt. No one's consent is getting trampled. But you embody it to dispel it. And that's one of the secrets of occultism that is very relevant and very misunderstood in New Age communities, which is why are these people preoccupied with apparently negative forces? Because they're trying to defuse them. That's what they're doing. They're trying to get that polarization, throw it back into the middle and saying, let's neutralize this sucker. Let's be that negative emanation and neutralize it. So you need a lot of power and balance to do that. A weak person will just get thrown into that sort of gravitational well and disappear and just become a little minion of evil. We don't want that.
Yeah.
But a strong person with a lot of balance and experience and maturity, a Gandalf character, throw them into it. They can embody that thing. Like in the Lord of the Rings movies when Galadriel embodies the power, the darkness of the ring, and for a moment she lets it overtake her and goes, oh my God, I would be the Ice Queen bitch from hell. And she becomes this tremendous negative entity, and she says, no, that's not for me, that's not for me. But you have to attain a certain stage of awareness and strength before you can do that. So expressing the negative in safe ways is an excellent way to not let it haunt you and overtake you, because you're never afraid of it anymore then. You've been the devil, you've been the gunman, you've been the hunter, you've been the hunted, but you've done it on your terms. Right. So you understand the predatory nature of Earth because you have enacted it. Rather like a pageant, you've enacted it on your terms. That's a great technique.
That's awesome. Wow.
I do like that. That's powerful. Share with us, this could be a whole broadcast in itself, but share with us some of the aspects of the secret teachings and hidden treasures of our ancient ancestors and why it's important to know some of this.
Gosh, again, you're always asking me the most enormous questions, young man. Wow.
Because it gives you the opportunity, then I get to see where you're going to go with it. I want to keep it open, but I like to see where you traverse with it.
No, I love it. It's really good because, as you say, it's very, very kind of you because it gives me lots of different paths to choose. I would say that one of the things I've found in studying the more esoteric and secret information and knowledge that I have been exposed to and had shared with me is that they are usually concerned with the most fundamental things that we think we know. So one of them that I've been introducing into my work in the last 18 months in particular is the nature of the sun. So what is a star? What is our star? What actually is it? And if you go back through the last 300 years of mystical literature, and that 300 years in particular, because like it as not, if you go much further back than that, the level of articulation in the language is very inadequate. So some of the most prized documents in esoteric, initiated study groups is quite recent, because those guys have said, look, I know this is old, but let me explain it better than anyone else has ever done. And they do. And then they explain this thing, and they say, yeah, and we knew about this pre-Zoroastrian, philosophy in the East, in the northern eastern regions of the planet. We knew about this, but they did it in poetry, which is very difficult to read anywhere ever now. You just get hints of it, and it feels distant because we don't communicate quite in the same way anymore. If you go to a serious dissertation of something or see someone giving an exposition of something very substantial, they're not going to do it as a poem. Not usually. So the method of transmission has changed. But throughout that period of the last 300 or 400 years, there's a distinct emphasis on the sun. And then you follow that back to solar worship and Christian imagery and representational texts within the canonical Bible and within the wider esoteric Christian material, particularly the Nag Hammadi tractates, Gnostic materials, that shows that there's something very important about the sun. And there's a very primal misconception that we have, that we were taught when we were kids, which is, well, it's this big fireball thing that is very hot. It's like a giant nuclear reactor. It's 97 million miles away, and it basically is the sort of engine that heats and lights and keeps everything going in our solar system, right? That's absolutely turned upside down in sincere mystical study to say no. Incorrect. Absolutely upside down, wrong way around, nothing to do with that. A better way of thinking about it is to say the ultimate arbiter of consciousness while you're alive as a material being is that thing there. And that thing in the sky, that yellow sun, and as I'm talking about this, I'm looking out the window, looking at it, is alive. And it is a being, and it is, we would call it a male being, but it's a bit more complicated than that. But it is a thing, it is an entity of tremendous power, but also this kind of searing, scary apathy as well, right? Which it couldn't give a toss about our little scurryings on Earth. And yet, when we get to a certain point, it suddenly becomes interested in us. When we get to a certain stage in our evolution, consciously, suddenly the sun starts to take notice of individuals and groups, but mainly individuals. And so, as well as the animal will, the soul will, and the divine will, we also have solar will. The solar will, which is like an anchor for divinity in this system. And there are many complications with that, because as human beings we can't help but think about male and female, good and evil, which are very, very misleading concepts. Very misleading. But you have to understand the nature of good and evil and male and female before you can begin to get better terms and transcend those. So explorations into the divine feminine are extremely important and worthwhile. I do that. I know Laura does that. Very important to understand that, particularly for the men as well, quite honestly. But the nature of solar activity and the relationship between that light and the nature and substance of consciousness is a tremendously important teaching in contemporary mysticism, tremendously important. And I don't think it would be untoward for me to say that as we would call it, light is consciousness. And imagine if you went too close to the sun, what would happen to you? That's the same thing that if you had too much consciousness and you weren't ready for it. So one of the initiatory stages for the human being is to pass through that star as a gate, a star gate. That's kind of, to some extent, part of its function. Again, like us, though, it has what we might even call an animal nature, which is it is fire. It has the effect of heat. It isn't really hot at all, as it happens. But it has the effect of heat. You know, go and lie on a beach in Mexico and tell me that it's not hot. Well, it has the effect of heat. But that's only one emanation of it, just like we have an animal nature. We certainly have a higher nature. Its higher nature also has a relationship with us. And when there's a coronal mass ejection, that is a very, very serious and important piece of conversation that's going on between Mercury and Venus and Earth and Mars in particular, but also the other planets. So to demonize the sun and say, well, basically the sun is going to, we're at the mercy of it, and it's going to throw out this coronal mass ejection shortly that's going to turn the grid off, and we're all going to be sent back to the Stone Age, and it'll be like Mad Max. A, I don't buy that, and B, I think that the tremendous danger in that as a control system shadow project is to set us against the sun, to consider it an enemy, which it isn't. It's not an ally or an enemy. It's totally neutral. But you will see time and time again, people switch around between solar and lunar bodies, between them being okay and being not okay. They're evil, they're good, they're bad, the hollow space stations, the divine goddesses, they're helpful, they're unhelpful, whatever. They're not. They're completely, in my understanding, completely in themselves as organic bodies, neutral, as is any advanced state of being is neutral. You cease to have positive and negative influence, it becomes irrelevant. The higher through the dimensional structures you go, the more and more important it is to understand that what we call positive and negative, good and bad, creative and destructive, all that fades away and becomes very infantile human concepts. So to say that, well, some bad things are happening here and there, well, yeah, of course they are. You know, you examine the history of England, and it depends when you look at it to say it was peaceful and wonderful. It's dreadful. It's a police state at the moment. A few thousand years ago, it was even worse, you know. And then a few thousand years before that, it was a paradise, an absolute Lord of the Rings paradise, just unbelievably the best place on the planet, which is why all the druids would gather there, because it was so lush and fantastic and full of this telluric fountains of wonderfulness. You know, it was just awesome. So it depends when you look at it. So to say this is bad, say, well, okay, but what period are you talking about and how long does that last? Because badness comes and goes. Goodness comes and goes. They are primary lessons for the human. And to imagine that the celestial bodies or even higher extraterrestrial intelligences are still subject to that is naive. It's only the lower forms that are dwelling in goodness and badness.
Wow, this is just incredible. So what do you think the most important thing, you know, right now currently, you know, people should be really paying attention to and embracing? And I know that's an extremely vast question, but I mean, my gosh, I don't know what I would do if I were asked. But I guess, yeah, just to sort of give people a focal point on what to really work with.
Sure. I think consume less media is really important. There's an awful lot of people, of course, who have cottoned onto the idea that mainstream media is stupid. We know that. I'm not even going to talk about that. So most people are not doing that anymore. The alternative media also should be carefully selected. Obviously, your fantastic show, number one on the list. Let's keep doing that. So choose what you want to watch. Choose what you want to listen to and download and all the rest of it. But the only stupid emails I get, because most of the emails I get are just from phenomenal people talking about amazing things, you know, just very, very, very encouraging to see the level and the quality of communication. But the only ones that make me laugh, which are a bit foolish, are from people who've got themselves scared, right? So one of the most destructive things, which doesn't mean bad, it just means destructive, one of the destructive elements in our wider community, if I can call it that, is prophecies of doom, right? So, you know, like in the Bible, it says there'll be rumors of war and rumors of this and whispers of destruction and the approaching cataclysm and the tribulation and all this. Those whispers are going to come through our community, right? So all the prophecies of doom are constantly bubbling up, and there's been a resurgence of that recently. I don't know if you guys have been exposed to that, but there has been more discussion about endings and cataclysms and world-changing events, and you know, the government stepping up its kind of authoritarianism and so on and so forth. As you guys discuss, and as I frequently discuss in my work, what happens out there is very literally a projection of what happens inside. So if you sit in your office or bedroom or living room with your laptop reading forums about destruction and fear and control, then you begin to assist that reality tunnel in becoming real and becoming actual. My advice as a very current topic would be to say that prophecies of doom, there aren't any, right? Because that, again, is a very low-level way of thinking. It's a very naive way of thinking. It's okay, just in the same way that a baby would be naive. Of course they're naive, because they're new. They don't know anything. It's all right. We find their naivety very charming. So there's nothing wrong with naivety in itself. But when you get prophets of doom, without exception, they are from naive men and women. because real prophets never ever transmit the information unless somebody asks them about it privately in person. So prophets don't come about like that. So that is a relevant theme at the moment, that I think we should understand, that most people who prophesize doom have missed the point. They've missed the point, and it's not helping us at all. And as it happens, none of it ever comes to pass either.
Right.
So I would say that's a relevant theme at the moment. Another one is what you raised before, which is self-authority, which is to understand, and I'm sure you guys get this, people write to me and say, is this okay? Is this something that I should read and listen to? Is this guy okay? Is this person worthwhile? And I'm like, you really, really have to decide that for yourself. My personal opinions really are not relevant because they're based on very singular, personal, specific things about my life and what I think are good and it's like what music I like or what paintings I like. It's really not going to be incredibly relevant to anyone else. In the same way, I think there is a distinct movement towards people becoming more particular, more picky about what is good. So whereas I'd say 5 or 10 years ago, there were an enormous amount of people getting away with some very shoddy work in this field, it's harder now because people are much more switched on,
right,
much more discerning. So it's good for us who are, serious about what we're doing, because we have to be very sharp and very good, because people are becoming able to spot what's good and what isn't. And let me just be clear about the distinction between those things. Who knows things of great value and importance and applicability, and who doesn't? Who's just outlining things and doesn't really know anything, but is sharing something generally. There's nothing wrong with that. But in America in particular, how to not make friends this, I've noticed that a lot of people who don't know things pretend that they do. Mm-hmm. And that has to come to an end, right? So that has to stop. And I think gradually people are onto that. So conferences now and events and workshops now have got to be really, really sharp to engage those people. So I think that's a very positive change, in that the audience who used to go to, New Living Expo and Conscious Life and whatever the hell, they're getting more picky now, and they're withdrawing their consent from very, very general teachings and saying, no, be specific, be authentic, actually walk this, or I don't want to know. So I think that's a very positive development, because it's starting to weed out those who were really just trying to make a buck, I think that's getting harder now.
Yeah.
I like what you're saying, Neil, because it's a sign of people, waking up. I mean, and so that expression sheeple. I mean, as people are still coming out of that, they may be willing to kind of put their attention wherever, but now it's being more fine-tuned, as you're saying, and I think that's wonderful. And
it is, and people are saying, I used to listen to this guy and this guy, but I can't anymore, because they sort of like their ego has got in the way of the work, and I'm like, wow, that's a really beautiful observation that they've come to really quickly. So whereas in the past that might take 10 years to develop that level of discernment, now newcomers who've only been doing this for a few short years are very quickly learning who are the authentic people. Goodness is something I associate with authenticity. Badness is something that I associate with inauthenticity. So bad is never really bad. It's just someone who's having a go and getting a bit too big for the boots. It's not terribly bad, it doesn't really matter. And we know who those people are. But when you come across the authentic people, you can tell. And that awakening and that awareness, I agree with you, is very much reflected in that. And I think it's very, very encouraging because they're starting to develop individuals out there more trust in their own judgment. So rather than being, massively excited about such and such an event that they would have gone to 10 years ago, they're more excited about going out into the forest for the weekend with a tent and a notepad and paper on their own.
Yeah, exactly. Now, this is a great little segue into getting some information about your book, The Unfoldment. Tell us about your book.
Well, you can go to neilkramer.com, 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 and you can look on the right-hand side, and there's like a scroll down a bit, and there's a picture of this book with like this white cross with these little coloured shapes and The Unfoldment. So The Unfoldment you can get in the usual places, Barnes and Noble and Amazon and all the rest of it, and loads of other little retailers, and it's in bricks and mortar bookstores as well. And The Unfoldment is my attempt to engage anybody who is in the slightest bit interested in changing their life to be better. And that is a matter of knowledge, a matter of worldview, a matter of esoteric history, and a matter of essentially looking around and saying, why is the world so stupid? Why is everything so crazy? And why do I not feel like going to vote anymore? So a lot of people in Europe have stopped voting, even like dead traditional conservative mums and dads and stuff. They stopped voting, and I think it's the most wonderful thing I've ever heard, because it means that people are starting to lose faith, not in the parties or the politics, but the whole thing. It kind of makes no sense. And
right.
So in my own little way, I'm trying to say, yeah, that's a very, very honest observation. And here's a book that is a reflection of my response to that, which is, yeah, the world isn't the way we thought it was, and some of it's really weird and hazardous, yes, but there's also some astonishing adventures and some fabulous uplifting journeys to be had, which really will enliven us again. And for the people who've been walking this path for a while, I also wanted to make sure that there was plenty in it for them as well. So I've kind of written it at two levels. So it's a very respectful book to say to anybody, let me give you a broad spectrum view of what it is to live as an authentic sovereign person. For the seasoned journeyer, it's let's remind ourselves of some things and share some new reflections. So one would hope that there's something in it for all levels. So yeah, you can get that on there. And also on the website, there's a download of my previous audio book called The Audio Cleaver, which is like 3 years of essays from 2006 to 2009. So there's an awful lot of stuff on there. There's like a DVD, Walking the Sacred Path. There's also another audio download of a workshop I did last year called Unfoldment, Secrets and Syncs. So there's all kinds of stuff on there. So whether you prefer to get a piece of paper in your hand and read it, or you want to watch something on a screen, or you want to listen to it on your player, you can do all those different things.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Well, you got some really wonderful feedback on your book, and I'm looking forward to it myself.
Thank you.
So, Neil, what do you think when, I know you know a lot of, obviously, you've delved in deep into the conspiracy stuff, too. What are your thoughts on, like, chemtrails and just our future with these agendas still at play? How do we best sort of skirt around all that?
On an animal level, chemtrails are a disgrace and an abomination to the planet and its purity. Simple as that. On a soul level, it doesn't really matter because they won't last very long, and they'll go away. So like any attempt to bring a weapon or an influencing factor to make control easier, they're all temporary. So that's when we observe something like chemtrails or HAARP or space-based energy weapons that disintegrate things on Earth. You have to realise these are all little toys that come and go, and it is sad to see organic systems interrupted by that. It is sad. There's no question about that. But we have to engage the philosophy of our soul-level consciousness, which says, yeah, that is part of the theatre of life. It's part of the conflict of polarization to see this stuff going into effect. And at a very kind of alchemical, psychological level, chemtrails are an expression of the human being's disavowal of their own sovereignty. So to have the sky above your own head filled with poison, that's what happens when you stop thinking for yourself. And that's what happens when you continually, every day, consent to giving your own authority away. That's what happens. And if it needs to be shoved in people's faces, then so be it, until people finally start to do something about it. So the more we disown our power, the more dark this silly empire becomes. It really does. And it has to be that way. And it has to get very dark. I mean, you walk around Los Angeles on a Saturday afternoon, or Portland, or New York, or anywhere, and you're going to see a lot of people who are not engaging with reality. They're walking around, but they're not engaging with reality. And chemtrails is a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So brilliantly put. Thank you.
I love the incredible empowerment aspect of your energy, of who you are, Neil. And
Thank you.
It's just nice to hear you speak about things in such a balanced way. And I'm just sitting here, and I mean, it's tickling my foundation beliefs, because I'm sitting here saying, yeah, this is, nothing's going to get in the way of this process for us, for the collective.
Nothing. It cannot. No.
And I'm not going to be crushed by looking at those aspects of what's trying to get in the way. I'll put my attention on it. I'll bring information out. I'll share about it. But it's not going to crush me, and it's not even going to, get me tripped up anymore. And that's what I'm just sitting here. And I'm like, wow, Neil's been feeding that aspect of me in this broadcast tonight, and I'm really grateful for that.
Well, you're most welcome, and that is an example of what we were talking about earlier, where my desire, we talked about intentions before we started this, my desire, my intent, my will is to give in service. And I know that can sound a little bit trite sometimes, but that's where the pleasure is. That's where the fun is. You know what I mean? To say, if we empower each other philosophically and spiritually to think, what if we were sovereign? Would authority begin to collapse without any bloodshed? Yes, it would. If philosophically you understand that you're sovereign, you automatically begin to withdraw power from the authorities without any bullet ever needing to be fired. And that's the exciting thing. So that is a giving energy, and it's very dangerous to the control system, which I love, obviously.
Yeah, all of it.
And it's also something that doesn't require 7 billion people to wake up, because that's not what Earth's for. Earth is always for a very small number of people to be awake, and then they move on. Mm-hmm. And it's always a very small threshold of like 0.1% or whatever. That's all that's necessary. All we have to do is witness. That's all we've got to do. Nobody has to do anything other than witness authentically what is going on and behave and act and think in accordance with your own authentic divinity. It's dead easy. Just witness.
Yes.
This has been great. Now, before we close out and get points of contact and what you've got coming up next and everything, I think we'd like to give you just a little bit of time here to touch on anything that we didn't ask, or to share anything that you'd really like to share that we didn't, draw the attention to.
I would just reiterate a point that we seem to have, between the three of us, brought up a few times, which is be your own boss, really. If you enjoy listening to Dr. Dream and Laura Eisenhower and Neil Kramer and all these other super people who are doing their best to learn and teach and know, great, soak up everything you need, and pick carefully the people that you enjoy, and gauge to the best of your ability their authentic impulse, not their inner value. We can never know that about a person, but how authentic they are. Don't be afraid to gauge that in a person. And when you do that, I think instead of listening to 500 speakers and authors, you end up listening to 10 or 12. But the depth that you go into with that is of a great and high value. It's of a really super absorbing, rewarding level. So I think it's good to be picky and choosy about what you listen to, in the same way that you'd be picky and choosy about the food you put in your mouth, the chemicals you put inside your body. You're not just going to put any rubbish in nowadays. We think more carefully about that these days. So we should with our minds as well. Mm-hmm. What you put in your mind has a permanent effect on your whole life, all of it. So be selective about that. That's what I would say.
Oh, love it so much. Wow, I've loved this interview incredibly. Thank you so much for just everything that you shared. Can you let our listeners know your points of contact and future events they can find you at?
Sure. NeilKramer.com is really the thing to do, to go there. You can buy my books and CDs and downloads and whatnot if you enjoy what I do. You can read loads of essays on there for free. You can listen to, hundreds of hours of free interviews and discussions and conversations on there as well. You can see what things are coming up in the future. I'm doing a workshop on September the 7th and 8th in Trout Lake in Washington, Alchemy of Will. There's other things in the pipeline as well. There's some new stuff coming online on the website, which you'll be able to see about in October. So, NeilKramer.com, just go there.
Excellent.
This has been perfect, Neil. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, and just sharing what comes so naturally to you and what you're here to do. And lots of appreciation from us focused on you, that's for sure.
Oh, you're very welcome, both of you, and it's a privilege to be able to speak to you guys and your audience, and thank you very much.
Oh, gosh, thank you so much.
Thank you, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Okay.
All righty. Take care.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.